Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really grim one, a story that's fascinated and horrified people for decades. The Wonderland Murders. Happened back in '81, Hollywood's still officially unsolved.
Yeah, it's a heavy one. We've got a stack of material submitted by a listener, actually. Everything from, academic articles on AI and forensics, NIJ pieces on cold cases, even Reddit threads, Michael Connolly's podcast on this very case.
Right, a real mix. And our mission, basically, is to dig through all this stuff, try to piece together what happened, why it's still unsolved, and maybe see if modern science, like forensics and AI, could, change things even now.
Exactly. Could these new tools shed light on such an old cold case?
And the hook is immediate, isn't it? The sheer brutality people compared it to Manson back then. Plus, you've got this whole Hollywood underbelly vibe. Drug dealers, a famous porn star, maybe even organized crime figures lurking around. Okay, let's dive in. Who are these people at 8763 Wonderland Avenue?
So this was the base for the Wonderland gang in Laurel Canyon. The leader, apparently, was Ronald Lee Lanius, Ron, Vietnam vet, but got a dishonorable discharge. Story is he smuggled heroin in body bags.
Wow, okay. That's quite a start. And he was maybe linked to other killings, too.
Yeah, he was a person of interest in other homicides around that time. Then you had William Raymond Deverell, Billy, second in command, struggled with heroin. Joy Audrey Goldmiller held a lease, also a user. Tracy Raymond McCord, David Clay Lind. They were all involved in, drugs dealing, armed robbery to support it.
And John Holmes, the adult film star, he was around a lot.
A very frequent guest, yeah. Heavy cocaine user, apparently. So it was, well, a pretty volatile mix of people and activities centered around that house.
Definitely sounds like it. And it wasn't just drugs, right? They escalated things.
Big time. Just 2 days before the murders, June 29th, 81, Lanius, Deverell, Lind, and McCourt pulled off this incredibly audacious robbery. They hit the home of Eddie Nash.
Eddie Nash, nightclub owner, known connections to organized crime, right?
That's the one. And get this, the Wonderland crew disguised themselves as cops to get in.
As cops? Seriously, wow. That takes some nerve.
Huh?
Or desperation. What did they take?
A lot. Reports say at least $1 million worth of drugs, cash, jewelry, even guns the gang had previously sold to Nash. But it went badly. Lynn shot Nash's bodyguard, Gregory Dials. Injured him.
Okay, so violence right from the start of that incident. That probably didn't sit well with Nash.
Not at all. And it seems Nash pretty quickly figured John Holmes had to be involved somehow.
How so?
Well, Holmes had been over at Nash's place several times that same morning, just hours before the robbery. And crucially, he supposedly left a sliding glass door unlocked. Easy access.
Ah, the inside help angle.
Exactly. And Scott Thorson, Liberace's former partner, he was at Nash's house too, buying drugs apparently. Thorson later claimed he saw Nash have Holmes beaten pretty badly, threatened him until Holmes coughed at the names of the robbers.
Thorson. His credibility has been questioned, hasn't it?
Oh, definitely, over the years, yeah. But his story, true or not, points to Nash being furious and absolutely believing Holmes was involved in setting him up. He wanted payback.
Which leads us very quickly to the night of July 1st, the murders themselves. What actually happened at the Wonderland house?
It was early morning, around 3 a.m., just 2 days after that Nash robbery. Someone, or maybe multiple someones, forced their way into the townhouse. And inside, it was just carnage.
Yeah.
4 people were bludgeoned to death. Ronald Lanius, Billy Deverell, Joy Miller, and Barbara Richardson. She was David Lynn's girlfriend just visiting.
Bludgeoned with what? Do we know?
The weapons were believed to be hammers, maybe metal pipes, just incredibly brutal up-close violence. It suggested, a lot of rage.
Horrifying. And there was a survivor.
Miraculously, yes. Ron Lanius' wife, Susan. She was attacked just as viciously, suffered terrible brain damage, but she lived. However, she had total amnesia about the attack itself. Couldn't remember a thing.
And the other gang members, Lind and McCourt?
They weren't there. Lind was apparently off at a motel, using drugs with a prostitute. McCourt was at his own place. Lucky for them, I suppose.
It's just chilling that neighbors apparently heard screams but didn't call the police.
Yeah, that's a really grim detail. But the sources say the house had a reputation, Lots of noise, disturbances, fights. People just thought it was another night at the Wonderland house, apparently. Didn't realize the severity.
So when were the bodies actually found?
Not until late afternoon the next day, around 4 p.m. Some furniture movers working next door heard Susan Lanius moaning and raised the alarm. The scene itself. Investigators described it as one of the most brutal they'd ever encountered.
I can only imagine. So the police arrive. LAPD detectives Tom Lange and Robert Souza. Where does the investigation go first? John Holmes seems like the obvious link.
Exactly. And they found something pretty solid, forensically speaking. John Holmes's palm print. Right there on the headboard of Romulanius' bed.
Okay, that's significant, right at the scene.
Huge. Based largely on that print, Holmes was arrested and charged with all 4 murders. The prosecution's theory was basically that Holmes felt cheated out of his share from the Nash robbery loot,
Right.
and either helped Nash's people get in for revenge or maybe even participated himself. Kind of a betrayal narrative.
But his defense saw it differently.
Completely. They painted him as a victim, said he was forced, under duress by the real killers, to simply let them into the house just before the murders happened.
Yeah.
He was terrified, basically.
So a classic whodidit trial. What was the verdict?
After a pretty sensational trial, the jury acquitted Holmes on all the murder charges.
Acquitted. Even with the palm print.
Even with the print. But he didn't walk completely free. He refused to testify further, clammed up, so the judge jailed him for 110 days for contempt of court.
Huh. And didn't his ex-wife say something later?
Yeah, years later, his first wife, Sharon, claimed he had confessed to her, said he'd led 3 men to the house that night, but crucially, never said who they were. Holmes himself died in '88 from AIDS complications, taking whatever secrets he had with him.
So Holmes is acquitted, but the story doesn't end there. What about Eddie Nash? He must have remained a suspect.
Oh, absolutely. Took a while. But in 1990, Nash and his bodyguard, Dials, the one who got shot in the robbery, were charged by the state. Scott Thorson testified against them again.
And what happened?
First trial. Hung jury. Couldn't agree.
Okay.
Second trial in 1991. Both Nash and Dials were acquitted.
Acquitted again. So still no convictions for the murders themselves.
Officially, no. But then things took another turn in 2000. The feds came after Nash, arrested him on federal RICO charges.
RICO, organized crime stuff.
Exactly. Drug trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy to commit the Wonderland murders was part of it, and even bribing a juror from his first day trial.
Bribing a juror. Wow. That points to some serious lengths to avoid conviction.
Definitely. It suggested a much bigger picture of Nash's operations. Faced with all that, plus his age and health, Nash took a plea deal in 2001.
What did he admit to?
He admitted to the juror bribery, yeah. And the RICO charges, money laundering. He also admitted ordering his guys to go get his stolen property back from Wonderland.
Okay.
And conceded, that telling them to do that might have led to violence. But, and this is key, he never admitted to planning or ordering the murders.
So admitted to surrounding crimes, but not the killings themselves. What sentence did he get?
Got 4.5 years in prison, plus a $250,000 fine. Served his time, got out, and died years later.
So still, after all that, no one ever convicted for pulling the trigger or swinging the hammer, so to speak.
Correct. Officially unsolved.
This seems like a good point to bring in that concept from our source material modus operandi, or MO. How might that apply here, even without a conviction?
Right, modus operandi, it's Latin for method of operating. It's about looking for patterns in how a criminal acts. The specific behaviors, the tools, the timing, the victim type. Investigators use it to link cases or narrow down suspects.
So like a signature.
Sometimes it includes a signature, which is more about psychological needs, but MO is more about the practicalities of committing the crime. It can be physical stuff, like how they got in, psychological, like who they targeted, geographical, temporal.
In Wonderland, what would the MO suggest?
Well, the most striking thing is the extreme brutality, the bludgeoning with those specific types of weapons, the overkill almost. That level of violence, focused on everyone in the house associated with the gang, that could be part of an MO. It suggests intense rage, maybe, or a very clear, terrifying message being sent.
But without knowing who did it, you can't definitively say this is their MO.
Exactly. It's suggestive. It tells you about the nature of the crime, the likely mindset, perhaps, but you can't tie it to a specific person or group without that conviction. It remains a characteristic of the crime, not necessarily a known perpetrator.
Okay. Now, this all happened decades ago, 1981. Forensic science has changed massively since then. Could modern techniques actually make a difference now? We saw that NIJ article about cold cases.
Absolutely. That's a key question. The NIJ piece really highlights DNA, which obviously wasn't available in '81. Think about the Gacy case mentioned. DNA helped identify victims decades later. So if any biological evidence from Wonderland was properly collected and preserved...
Which is always a big if with old cases.
A huge if. But if it exists, retesting with today's sensitive methods could be huge. Same for fingerprints. The FBI's newer systems are much more powerful than what they had back then. Remember that palm print? Maybe there were other latent prints.
And it's not just about the tech, right? The article mentions specialized units.
Yeah, dedicated cold case units are crucial. They need specific skills digging through old records, understanding how forensic testing has evolved, knowing what's possible now versus then.
Hmm.
They prioritize based on solvability. Is there physical evidence? Is the documentation good? Wonderland seems to tick those boxes. Potentially there was physical evidence found and likely extensive case files.
Which brings us to the really cutting-edge stuff, artificial intelligence. We had that source about AI and forensics. How could that even apply here?
It's fascinating, actually. AI could potentially help in several ways with a case like this. Imagine feeding all the case files, police reports, witness statements, transcripts into an AI. It could analyze that huge amount of text, potentially spotting connections or inconsistencies humans might miss.
Processing vast amounts of data.
Exactly. And image analysis. If there are crime scene photos, AI might enhance details. If any old surveillance video surfaced, maybe from nearby businesses, AI might clean it up. Then there's pattern analysis for trace evidence, if any exists.
What about that 3D reconstruction idea?
Right. Using AI algorithms in VR to build a virtual model of the crime scene at 8763 Wonderland Avenue. That could give investigators a whole new way to visualize the space, test theories about movement, lines of sight, maybe even identify potential weapon locations based on algorithms trained to recognize objects.
That sounds almost like science fiction, but it's becoming real.
It is.
Yeah.
But the article also rightly points out the challenges.
Like what?
Well, algorithmic bias is a big one. You have to make sure the AI isn't reflecting existing biases, privacy concerns with handling data, and crucially, AI can't replace human investigators. It's a tool to support decision-making, but you need human oversight, interpretation, and accountability. You couldn't just let an AI declare someone guilty.
Gotcha. Critical caveats. So, pulling it all together after looking at all this, why does Wonderland remain unsolved? What were the biggest roadblocks?
It really feels like a perfect storm of problems. Fundamentally, there was never that one piece of absolutely conclusive evidence beyond a reasonable doubt tying a specific person or persons directly to the killings and sticking in court.
Despite the palm print.
Despite the palm print, which the jury obviously didn't find sufficient on its own for Holmes. Then you had unreliable witnesses, like Thorson, whose story shifted. Conflicting accounts muddied the waters. Holmes being acquitted was a huge blow to the initial investigation's main thrust.
And Nash denying involvement in the actual murders, even in his plea deal.
Right. He admitted related crimes, but drew a line at the murders. Plus, the passage of time, evidence could have degraded or been lost, though good documentation might mitigate that somewhat. And don't forget, Ron Lewonius himself wasn't exactly an innocent victim. He had enemies, was linked to other crimes. That broadens the pool of potential motives and suspects way beyond just the Nash robbery revenge angle.
And the organized crime connections.
Right,
That always makes things harder.
Always. People connected to organized crime are often adept at insulating themselves, using intermediaries, enforcing silence. It creates layers of difficulty for investigators. Even that statute of limitations running out on the juror bribery shows how legal technicalities can get in the way of full accountability. It's a complex, messy case with too many loose ends and unanswered questions.
It really is. A tangled web, like you said earlier. Drugs, violence, Hollywood, questionable characters, legal battles. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main things to take away from digging into these sources?
I think the clearest takeaway is just how starkly the Wonderland murders expose that dark, violent side of Hollywood, fueled by drugs and desperation in that era. It's a chilling story. And despite multiple investigations, high-profile trials, lots of suspicion, it remains officially unsolved because of that mix of unreliable testimony, legal complexities, and the basic difficulty of proving guilt in that kind of criminal milieu.
But there's maybe a sliver of hope, or at least possibility, offered by modern science.
Potentially, yes. It's been over 4 decades, which is a long time. But forensic science has leaped forward. DNA analysis, if applicable evidence exists, is powerful. And AI, well, that offers genuinely new ways to re-examine complex data, both physical and documentary. Analyzing those extensive case files with AI, for instance, might just uncover a pattern or link missed back then. It's not guaranteed, of course, but the possibility exists if the will and the resources were there.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. Given how much forensic tools have evolved and thinking about the sheer volume of information that probably still exists in files somewhere, could a really focused, modern deep dive, maybe using AI to sift through it all, finally crack the secrets of what happened at 8763 Wonderland Avenue? And what does that incredibly brutal MO tell us about the crime itself, even if we never know for sure who wielded those weapons? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.